one of the funniest guys I've ever spoken to, and I always enjoy speaking to Dave Barry. He's basically been America's top humorist for about 5 decades, since the early 80s. And he had a column that was syndicated in 500 newspapers. He's written a ton of books, and this is his 3rd time on the podcast. But his latest book is Class Clown, The Memoirs of a Professional Wiseass. We get deep into it in this episode.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
So, Dave Barry, author of a memoir. You've written all these books. Now you finally write a memoir. Why did you do that?
Several reasons. Probably the most kind of commercial one was like, I'd finished the book a couple of years ago, a novel, and I was talking with my editor and my agent the way you do, like, what's next book going to be? And gradually we came around to memoirs are popular. People like memoirs. I was initially reluctant, but they convinced me that it was a good idea.
Why were you reluctant?
Because like all my life, I've written a lot about myself, but it's always been not really about myself. It's kind of using me as the everyman character to write humor. So I made a lot of jokes. I kind of present a persona, the humor, the wacky humor guy persona. But there's always been a little distance between me and, the written word me. I was basically thinking I'm going to entertain my readers. So as long as you were laughing and finding it funny, that's what I wanted. To write a memoir, you got to turn it more inward a little bit, talk about yourself really, and a little bit less. I mean, I still wanted it to be funny, but I also wanted it to be, if I'm going to write a memoir, I could be kind of accurate. So my first worry was is anybody going to care? What my life was like. Was it really that interesting a life? If I'm not just making jokes. So anyway, but once I plunged in, my editors convinced me that it was going to be all right. And by then it was too late.
What I always admire about your career, though, is how, and it's interesting to see it unfold in this book, and I don't know if this is going to make sense at first, but you've sort of built your career both vertically and horizontally. And so vertically in that, okay, start as a reporter, become a columnist, start getting to be a syndicated columnist, so you're in all these papers, but then you expand it out in other ways, like, okay, let's write screenplays, let's make a movie, let's write all these novels and books and so on. And so you've really kind of pushed your career to the max, as opposed to just writing a humor column for a Miami paper. It became a real phenomenon, from television, movies, again, to syndication. So you really did have an interesting life and career.
But was it, that's my worry is is it really interesting? Because it's, I maybe have written interesting things, but mainly my actual life is sitting in front of, sitting in front of a screen going, well, that sucks. Well, that's, you know what I mean?
But that's not actually what happens. And this is where it's similar to your columns. You say your columns are not really about you. It's sort of like you as an everyman. But I think of a lot of your columns as you doing things. Like when the Times wrote the article about, Miami, you go up to New York City and do stuff and actually experience New York City and then write about your personal experience there. And of course, it's in this funny, self-deprecating way, which was your style. And the book is structured like that as well. I don't you think part of your process is you do stuff and write about what happens in this kind of absurdist sort of way?
Yes, you're right, and that's sort of what made the book feel more possible to me. I do a lot of performance humor for a writer. I don't feel like I can just sit and think of things, and that's enough. I was for a long time, I was the Miami Herald's tactical assault humorist. I went out, as you say, and wrote a pretty vicious attack on New York City after the New York Times had written a story about Miami being the disaster. I did the same when the Orlando city of Orlando got its first basketball NBA team, the Orlando Magic, and the Miami. We had just gotten ours, the Heat, and we knew both teams were going to be terrible for a while. So at the Herald, my editors and I decided, well, let's start a rivalry between us and Orlando. So I went up there with a photographer and just wrote this vicious attack on the city of Orlando, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. And it's like really kind of non-journalistic. You know, you're not supposed to do stuff like that. You're not supposed to take sides and be inaccurate, but we just love doing that. The guys I work with at Tropic Magazine. So you're right, it was a little different. I wasn't just writing; I was doing stuff, and I kind of in my own personal life as well. Like I picked my son Rob up at middle school in the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. You know, obviously I did that so that I could write about it. You know, and a fair number of things just so I could write about them.
And I think that like you did it also with was it Grand Forks, North Dakota?
Yeah.
In the mayor.
Well, I made fun of North Dakota, which is a mistake that nobody should ever make because they take their state seriously. They protect their state. And I got an angry letter from everybody in North Dakota. It's like 115 letters. And also that they invited me up there. And, you know, when this kind of thing happens, this is like gold falling into your lap if you're a humorist. They invited me up to Grand Forks, North Dakota, and dedicated a sewage lifting station in my honor. And I went, and that was my job. But I like to go up there. And I'll never forget, I don't think I put this in my book, but I knew they would be waiting for me because they made a big deal about, Dave Barry's coming and we're gonna do all this stuff with Dave Barry and to Dave Barry and dedicate a sewage lifting station in my honor. But I knew they would be there. So like on the plane, I think I had to fly to Chicago and then from Chicago to there's no way to get to North Dakota directly from anywhere, including probably other parts of North Dakota. And on the plane, I had brought like a Bermuda, this is January now, it's like 20 below zero in North Dakota. But I had brought Bermuda shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. And on the plane, I changed. And like my fellow passengers were like, what is going on? I changed so that I could come out of the plane dressed in tropical attire.
That's funny.
Where the city fathers of Grand Forks, North Dakota met me. They treated me great. They were really wonderful. They were thrilled to have attention paid to them. And they did, in fact, dedicate a sewage lifting station in my honor. And maybe you or somebody who's listening can explain to us why they would want to lift the sewage. I don't know, but I would leave it down there. But up there, they lift their sewage.
Yeah. Where do they lift it to?
They lift it up, and then I don't know what. I would put it right back. Say, whoa, we don't want that. Put that back. There's some system involved. And the less we know about it, the better.
And it's these types of, like, for instance, with the New York City one, then it becomes a story of you doing this column.
Yes.
So it's like a double story. And then the fact that, like you mentioned how Ed Koch was asked about your column. And
he was not happy. He was very cranky about it. Yeah.
Right. He said not impressed.
Some guy in the press wrote about my New York. It was like
But what I love about that though is A, it continues the story, but B, it elevates your column to this thing where, okay, of course Ed Koch, the mayor of New York, read it. So it's both self-deprecating and name dropping at the same time. Like,
yeah, and I become part of the story, and you're right. That again, it's all wonderful. Maybe the best example of that, my favorite, and I had forgotten all about it until I started to write the memoir. But then it came back to me, was the time, I think it was early 90s, and the big issue was telemarketers calling people at home. This is when everybody had a landline, and it just had gotten out of hand. They were like, the phone would ring constantly, and it was almost every call was from a telemarketer trying to get you to change your long distance. I mean, this is how long ago this was, but long distance provider, or whatever. So somebody had introduced a bill in Congress to ban that, to make it so that if you wanted to opt out, you could opt out, and they could never call you at home again. And an organization called the American Teleservices, they don't call themselves telemarketer, the American Teleservices Association strenuously objected to this bill. And they said that they had a constitutional right to call you at home. Congress could not block them from doing that. So I wrote a column and I said, basically, the American Teleservices Association is saying should be unconstitutional. What do you readers think about that? Write and let me know. No, wait, don't write me. Why not just call the American Teleservices Association? And I put their phone number in, and I didn't realize what was going to happen. And I get a call then the day after that column right from the New York Times saying that they had completely, my reader said, and they got thousands and thousands of phone calls, completely swamped their switchboard. They had to close it down. They couldn't make or receive any telephone calls at the American Television. And they were furious. They were furious that this had happened to them. Like the same thing that had been happening to all of us. And that was just what you were talking about, an example where I became part of the story, but it kind of in a really gratifying way. And I had to tell the New York Times how regretful I was that I had wrecked the American Teleservice Association's switchboard operation.
So you didn't assert your constitutional right, though? I'm just like it's interesting that the directions you take, because you have a bunch of funny possible paths to go from there once they're so upset at you. But I guess saying you're regretful is actually you're saying what they should. What's funny is you're saying what they should have been saying, as opposed to you arguing with them.
You're thinking way more about this than I ever did, James. I basically just thought, hey, this is funny. We screwed them up. Good for my. And I talk about quite a bit in the book how my readers, and this is another big difference, I think, between my kind of column and most columns that made it kind of really wonderful for me, is that I think the traditional relationship between columnist and reader is, I am pronouncing and you're reading, and I may get feedback from you, but basically it's a one-way thing. It's me pronouncing one. But with my readers, it was really, they were my allies. I mean, they gave me a whole lot of story ideas. I had this thing going for years, like alert readers. I would always give them credit when they alerted me to some insane story, some toilet exploded somewhere. I would hear about it from my alert readers. But also, I could enlist them in things like that, crusades, where they would, step up, and and they think they really loved that. The readers, they felt part of the column.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you built a community.
Yeah,
because of your self-deprecation, because you included yourself, even in some small way, into the column. They related to you.
Yeah, my persona was never the authority, never the guru. It was always, I'm kind of an idiot, I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I even in the newspaper? That kind of thing. So you guys in the, out there, reader, just as much as I do, you can be part of this too. That was the idea.
There was also one thing about, first off, one thing is when I was reading this and I've read your other stuff, it always reminds me a little bit of a kind of more humorous Hunter S. Thompson, because Hunter S. Thompson would basically put himself in these insane situations. And his approach then was take a lot of drugs and then write about what happened in his particular style.
Or write about what he would imagine would happen, or write about whatever was going on in his brain.
Right.
But take a lot of drugs was the key there.
But he would finagle his way onto Richard Nixon's airplane during, 1972 campaign. And the next thing you know, you have Fear and Loathing in 72. And on the campaign trail in 72. And it reminded me of your style a little bit, that you put yourself into the situation and then you're Dave Barry in that situation, and it's funny.
Hunter Thompson was very much, he was writing about, whenever he wrote, he was writing about Hunter S. Thompson. I mean,
right. He wasn't an authority. He would act like an authority, actually, but it was clear he wasn't an authority.
Right. He was just the guy who was telling you whatever he wanted to do about what was going on.
And sometimes you see sports writers do that too. They're in, maybe Norman Mailer's piece on the fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. He's on the scene and writing it from his perspective almost, which is not. He kind of pretended to be more of an authority than he was, but so maybe it's not a good comparison. But it's Hunter S. Thompson reminded me the most of that particular approach.
Or P.J. O'Rourke was another guy. He was
P.J. O'Rourke
was a buddy of mine. And P.J. was a good friend of mine, but that was, when you read P.J., you were reading it to see what P.J. thought about whatever it was, and he was much more informed than I ever was. P.J. was a very smart guy, and he really knew what he was talking about. But that was his approach. This is my view of the world.
Yeah. No, and sadly he passed away. He was on the podcast right before that happened, and I've always enjoyed his work as well. So, and you've mentioned in here that Art Buchwald was a real inspiration to you, but I don't quite see Art Buchwald the same way. As he doesn't really put himself in this situation more. He's more of like a pure absurdist, say.
Yeah, no, Art was my friend, and when I was kid, he was like the god of humor columnists in this country. But I never patterned myself after him. He was a very traditional Washington-based, writes about politics writer, and very topical, but very much a specific style, not nearly the goofball or performance type that I was.
Another thing about your style, and you've talked about this before, which is that you'll take an idea that seems absurd to you, and then you'll stretch it to the maximum. Like you'll exaggerate it in ways that are funny. You'll go there. Like you'll just do whatever it takes to kind of like almost magnify the supposed seriousness of the topic, but then how ridiculous it is to take that topic seriously. So, and I find that to be a consistent. And you do this in the memoir as well. It's part of the self-deprecation.
Yeah, exaggeration is kind of an essential tool of the humorist, and I do use it a lot.
Take a quick break. If you like this episode, I'd really, really appreciate it. It means so much to me. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. Email me at altucher@gmail.com and tell me why you subscribed. Thanks. Another thing also that's interesting about your career, and I'm jealous of this, there's an aspect of your career which it seems like it can't happen anymore, which is syndication. Syndication must have been such a wonderful thing for the columnists back then, which to those who don't know what it is, it's you have a column in the Miami Herald, and then suddenly 500 other newspapers around the country are paying you to reprint it because there's no national network called Twitter or Facebook, whatever, where everybody in the world can see what you write.
Exactly. I was so lucky that syndication existed. And I tell the story in the book of how I sort of discovered the beauty of it, which was the first really successful thing I wrote that a lot of people wanted to reprint was an essay I wrote about natural childbirth, which I wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1980. And the Inquirer paid me $350, which is by far the most money. I was not making a living as a writer back then. I had a little column going on the side, but I was not getting paid a lot of money to do that. $350 was the most money I'd ever gotten for anything. And I was very happy about that. And I remember the day after it ran in the Inquirer, it ran on a Sunday. On the Monday, I got a call in my home in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania, from an editor at the Chicago Tribune who said, I saw your piece in the Inquirer. I loved it. I'd like to reprint it. And I'm like, great. And he goes, how much do you charge? And this is a question that had never arisen in my life. Nobody ever wanted to reprint anything. And I thought, well, I've already made $350, so anything else is gravy. So I said, how about $50? And there's a pause, and he goes, we'll pay you $500.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm thinking, if only I had said 25, he might have countered with 1,000, But that was, and that one piece, it ended up a whole bunch of newspapers reprinted it, and they all paid me for it. And I was stunned by this. And it was then that I began to see, in the months succeeding that, because each of these newspapers that reprinted that then wanted to know, well, what else have you written? And I said, well, I write this little column. And it started to snowball from there. But you're absolutely right. It was a fantastic thing for me, just a windfall. It made it possible for me to leave what I was doing, which was working for a living, and become a writer all the time. And it could not possibly happen today for exactly the reason you say. You write it one place and everybody on the internet can find it. One way or another, they'll get it. Whether they pay for it legitimately or not, they can find it. Well, the downside, let me just say the downside of syndication, my column ran at the high point in 500 newspapers. Now, a lot of newspapers would just take it and put it in, which is perfect from my perspective. Like whatever I wrote, they printed. But a lot of them, the bigger newspapers with the bigger staffs, they have editors, and those editors feel responsible for doing, whatever was in the newspaper. So they'd read it and they'd make little changes, or they'd reject things, or they would cut it for space or whatever. So I had had essentially hundreds of editors after the editor that I really had written it for, which was the one at the Miami Herald. And I'd already hashed out with him, whatever I agreed with or didn't agree with about whatever changes you want to make. All these other people could make changes. And I would get letters from readers who'd said, I read your column here, and then I also read it here, and I noticed it was really, and I'd look at these two versions, and one of them would be what I wrote originally, and one of them would be the same column with half was gone, or all the punchlines were gone, or something had been changed to... They could do whatever they wanted. They paid me, for the, and every now and then it would be so awful what they'd done that I would write to them and say, if you're going to do this to my column, I would really be happier if you just didn't run it. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to pay for it. But if it's supposed to be a humor column, and if you could take all the humor out of it, it just looks bad. Please don't run my column. Please don't do this anymore. And sometimes it would be a taste thing, because I was not known for being particularly tasteful as a guy. And so some newspapers would just not run it. But that was actually kind of fun for me, because then I could write a column about the newspaper that didn't run the column or objected to it. And I did that a few times. Some editors really hated me because of that.
I like that, turning the process into a story as well. I think that's a very valuable technique.
And you're not supposed to do that. That was definitely a violation of one of the rules of how journalism is supposed to work. You don't call out the newspaper that's running your column. But I could do it. I could get away with it because I was in a bunch of papers.
Yeah. And it's because each paper sort of wants to pretend that they're the only ones running your column. So when you write about them running your column and it's 1 of 500, it sort of removes the Wizard of Oz effect. Where
you're pulling back I was just going to say, you're pulling back the curtain a little bit on, there's real people doing this. I'm writing it. A bunch of people are editing it, and sometimes we don't agree.
By the way, it also shows, how the industry of writing has changed, not only with syndication, but the fact that you even got $350 in 1982, which is, I don't know, something like $2,000 in today's numbers. No, let's say, non-famous columnist would ever get $2,000 right now. Or, by the way, would never get $350 right now for a column. So, there's been deflation of what people pay writers.
Well, you're absolutely right, and it's a kind of a sad thing. The supply of writing far exceeds the demand, which is why Substack is, for some people, it's righted that balance a little bit if you are able to be successful, if you're able to find an audience. But you're right, it's gotten rough for freelance writers, very rough.
So if you were starting now and you had the same, or relatively the same set of interests, and the interest of writing and potentially being a humorist, what would you do? How would you do it? Obviously a Substack, but how would you build an audience then?
I don't know. I mean, I get asked that a lot, and I have no answer for it, because there's just if you go to look at Substack, there's just a lot of people writing on it. I mean, tons and tons, whatever genre you pick. It's mostly people, two main categories, which is politics, and there tends to be a great, the two sides we have in politics, and the two sides are pretty predictable. And you're going to see a lot of what you expect from the pro-Trump people, and you're going to see a lot of what you expect from the anti-Trump people. There's just way more supply than demand from both of those points of view. A lot of it is people who want a book deal. They want to be novelists. Again, way more supply than demand, and poetry, forget about it. There's a great supply, no demand as far as I can tell for poetry. So I
don't think there's ever been demand for poetry.
No, I know, you get in trouble when you say that, but you are so correct. So it's I don't know, honestly don't know how you get going. And I think the way you get going, most likely, this is just a guess, and it's not an informed guess because it's not what I do, but you go on X and you tweet funny stuff. Just because the attention span is very short, but you can get something out there. And if it's really, really funny, somebody might be a little bit interested in what else you've written. But to just like expect it, you're right. You could write a really brilliant essay and put it on Substack. And if, unless some miracle happens, most people will never see it. It's because there's just so many other essays on Substack.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed just in the past, let's say 10 to 15 years, is that you could, like 10 years ago, you could still write articles. You could put the link on, let's say, Twitter, and if it's good and you build a reputation and people repost it, it'll get shared. But now I feel like it's even harder to do that. You have to kind of post the whole story directly on Twitter, and then if it's good, people will share it. Because if it's a link out of Twitter, the Twitter algorithm now doesn't like that as much, or the X algorithm doesn't like that. So it won't really let your article be popular, your tweet be popular. So it's difficult. But one thing I would suggest, though, like take that breakout article that the Chicago Tribune then reprinted. It was your experience with childbirth, which is, for a man, is just a ludicrous proposition in many cases. And so it's still, even though there's an oversupply of words being written, there is never an oversupply of experiences. There's only so much experiences that one person can have. So I still think diving into an experience that's relatable and you look at it in this humorous way, I think that's still a winning advantage.
Right. But I mean, again, it just finding a way to reach the audience, though, is the tricky part. Because like in that case, and I think I talk about this in the book a little bit anyway, I was a boomer, 1980, having a baby. And natural childbirth was the big thing. And like, because we're boomers and boomers always do this. We're the first ones to ever have babies. Like, so we have this amazing new system we use. And we have classes. Like, I don't know how people had babies before they had classes. But anyway, so I was making fun of that. But it has happened. My demographic, the early 30s boomers, were also achieving success as in the news. They'd climbed through the newspaper hierarchy to the point where they could decide what was going to be printed in the newspaper. And along comes this story about exactly what the boomers are going through. They're all having babies too. So they loved it. They loved it. And then, but I was appealing to an audience of, the Sunday newspaper magazine editors, which is maybe in the entire country, 100 of them, which would be most of the country. Like if it's, you take, each city has a paper, and if most of those people are reprinting my thing, I reached the whole country because I could appeal to this, roughly 100 or whatever editors at that time. I don't know how you do that now, man. I really don't.
I don't think you can. I think things are too niche now, unless it's political. Like people who take extreme sides on politics, I think they can go viral still. But like you mentioned in the book, how when you wrote about politics, the Democrats thought you were Republicans, the Republicans thought you were Democrats. I think if you do that now, it's hard. Nobody likes you, right? And it's hard to go viral. No one wants to share something where they think it's the enemy. So it's just not going to happen. There's less neutral people.
You're absolutely right. And I've been lamenting this and lamenting it, not that it does any good, but way, way too much of our humor now is picking a side, and I call it assault humor, where your joke has to attack the right target, or we can't allow it. Even if it's hilarious, we can't allow it. And we saw like to an extreme degree during the Biden presidency, where we had a president who, like, pretty much the whole country thought, there's something wrong here. This is not. And nobody made jokes about that on late night television. What did they make jokes about? Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But we already knew that. We already knew those jokes. We'd heard those jokes, and we're like, they're kind of skipping over, whatever. And there was a time when you could do both. You could make fun of Donald Trump, or you could make fun of Joe Biden. You could be that person. It was okay. Johnny Carson was that guy. I mean, not for Trump and Biden, but he did that very effectively for years and years, and everybody loved him. Republicans loved him. Democrats loved him. The people who he was making fun of loved him. It was okay. Now it's not okay. You picked the wrong target. You're a bad person. You're evil. You're a fascist. You're a communist, whatever. And that is sad. I mean, it's really sad, I think. But there we are.
I agree with that. And I've encountered the same problem. And I sometimes I just encountered it just that I always try to say I'm being neutral, but I'm just asking the question. but still you just don't make any friends that way, and
You're not allowed to ask certain questions. You're not allowed to even raise certain issues. Like I don't know how we got there where we just like reject the idea even thinking about certain things, but that's where we are, at least publicly.
I remember I once said to one of my daughters, "Oh, I'm not gonna have an opinion on this," and she said to me right away, "Silence is violence." And I think there's this idea that you can't even, that being neutral itself is a bad
right.
thing.
You have to you have to have whatever flag is currently the right flag for your team in your like bio, or you're a bad human being. Silence is violence. Silence is violence. Yeah, that's. Oh, it's not.
It's not, but they'll realize that later when they desperately want to be silent.
When they're old, they'll look at Billy. My dad was right about that.
Yeah, but then it's too long to wait for satisfaction. That's the problem with being a parent sometimes. So look, you're doing the Substack. What's next? More movies?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not writing a book right now. I've been happy doing the Substack, which I've actually enjoyed a lot. And every now and then I get an email from my agent saying like, "So any ideas?" And at the moment, like, I'm happy. First of all, I'm 77 years old.
You're very young looking 77 though.
Well,
You're very
I don't
young,
care.
energetic.
I'm still 77. I don't have to be working on something, do I? I mean, like that a requirement? So right now, nothing.
But one book, I think the first time you came on the podcast was over Florida Man, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right. I think you're right.
Shop the Sherwin-Williams 4th of July sale and get 30% off paints and stains June 27th through July 7th. With prices starting at $34.29, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store or shop the sale online. Delivery available on qualifying orders. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Do you think there's something about Florida that's particularly, like, obviously every state has, like, New York City certainly has its quirks, every state has its quirks, but and I'm sure I asked you this when you first came on the podcast, and I lived in Florida for a while before I came to Georgia. What is it about Florida that's particularly crazy? And I hate asking you this. I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but
no, it's okay. It's okay. I find it kind of endlessly fascinating myself. And people, yeah, you're right. People do ask it all the time. Partly right now, okay, the president lives in Florida. So, and therefore Florida, for half the country, Florida is like, Hitler runs our state. But what I find so weird is Florida it's like the subject of an intense amount of scrutiny and criticism from the left. I mean, because our governor is a Trump guy, and Trump is here, but at the same time, it's getting all the scrutiny. All these people move here constantly. We're one of the fastest growing states in the union, and like a lot of these people are coming from New York and California.
Yeah.
And what's funny is they come here and they still make fun of Florida. But they come here. I guess it's partly because we don't have a state income tax, which is very appealing if you're coming from New York or California. My wife and I, we live in Miami. It is a Latin city. It is a predominantly Spanish-speaking city. We love it. It's a joyful, it's energetic, crazy city. But it's very much its own thing. It's completely different from Boca Raton, which is basically Long Island. Almost everybody there is from New York, and they talk like they're from New York, and they love New York, and they love their bagels and their pizza. And why does Florida have such crappy bagels and stuff like? And then you go go down to Key West, and you're basically in 1968. It's like a completely different vibe down there. Then you go to Orlando, and it's like, it's people going to theme parks, and go to Tampa. It's like this kind of coastal southern city. Go up to North Florida, and you're in the South. You're in Alabama and Georgia, even if you're in Florida. So it is not one thing, Florida. It's many, many different things. And, so it's like, you can call it whatever you want, but it is not, whatever you're calling it is not just that.
That's true. It's sort of like if you go to New Jersey, all of it's just New Jersey. It's just this giant suburb of New York. There's nothing else. It's not like, oh, well, this is the Latino New Jersey. It's not.
No,
it doesn't have.
It's Jersey is Jersey. Yeah.
Like I lived in Key Biscayne for a while, which is also about 70% Latin, but like from all South America, like you were saying. And I was having a problem because it was an experience unlike anything I've had before, where starting at about Thursday afternoon every week, the party starts. And it doesn't end till like Monday night. And my wife's much more social than me. She's like an extrovert, but I'm an introvert. By Friday morning, I'm tired. Okay, now we got to just stay in for the weekend. But it was just too much. It's like everybody's just raging for the whole weekend, like all night.
Miami likes to party. It really does. We like to celebrate, and any excuse. A long week, a holiday weekend in Miami is very much a holiday weekend.
Yeah. And so look, that was a big inspiration for a lot of your stuff. But also, I'm just curious, when you make the transition to other forms of writing, like you know, novels and so on, there's other subtler points did you just pick up naturally the concept of, okay, we've got a novel, we got to have twists in it, we got to have plot twists, we've got to have roughly, you know, several acts and things happen in each act and so on. Was that a natural transition for you, or is it a little difficult?
It was not so much difficult as it was unnerving, because, like, especially when I started, I'm not a novelist. I've never been a novelist. I've never been a master, took up one of those programs where you're supposed to learn how to write. I was an English major, so I read novels, but they were like, I never finished most of them because they were classics.
Yeah.
Like the Brothers Karamazov. So
it's like Harry Potter fan fiction at the end. Like no one's ever finished it to tell you that.
Now, I'm convinced that like nobody ever did, including Theodore Dostoevsky, never actually got to the end of the Brothers Karamazov. I know I did.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I ended up doing, and I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but I wrote the first novel, and really it's for every novel I've written, the same way I wrote my column, which was, I want to write it. When I wrote my column, I was like, what kind of column do I want to read? I want to read a column where I'm never bored, where everything in the column is funny to me or interesting to me because it's funny. And I'm that kind of writer. I'm very nervous if I go more than 2 sentences without a joke. And so the kind of novel I like to read is not the kind of novel where there's a lot of elaborate buildup and character development and description. I like a novel where things happen, and a lot of things happen, and they're funny or crazy or whatever. So I wrote the novel that I would want to read, at least I thought I would want to read. And I patterned it not on really anybody in particular, except what I kind of like to read. That's probably not I don't know.
No, that's interesting because, so like you get to a point where you're writing a little bit and you're like, oh, I feel a little bored. And then you try to surprise yourself. Like then the character died or, you know, whatever.
Well, with the novel, you have a little more time to build it up. You know, like you didn't have to, you can actually have some parts of that where it's, or at least in mine, where the action is occurring, but it has to be something occurring. It can't be like just the kind of novel that my wife likes to read, where I ask her, like, she's 400 pages in, and I say, well, what's it about? She goes, well, it's about these 2 sisters, and they, and like, what? And like, there's a relationship, and then like, I don't read that. I have mine like a car crashed on the first page, you know, into a helicopter.
You need to have like nuclear weapons going off pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Bring in the nukes. Yeah.
Yeah. And but you know, you mentioned in the memoir, you mentioned the kite runner, for instance, and your daughter accidentally, you know, talking about it or whatever. And like,
well, I contend, and I my wife, the kite runner sold 5 million copies as when I wrote my book, and my wife was responsible for 3 million of those sales. Because if you knew my wife, you're like, she's gonna, if she wants you to know something, you're gonna know it. She's not a shy person, and so she there was a period of her life where people, and pretty much anybody in the same room with Michelle, was going to be told, you should get The Kite Runner. And I did ask her, like, why don't you make one of my books into a bestseller? I finally met the guy, Khalil Gibran. Husseini. And I met him, and I said, my wife is the reason you have whatever money you have, you owe it to my wife. So anyway.
Did he laugh?
Yes, he did. He was a good guy.
That's good. Now, did Stephen King ever look at one of your novels and say, Dave, show me the novel before you publish it?
No, I would never inflict. I have gotten Steve King to blurb a couple of my books because he's a friend and he's a good guy, and he will blurb your book. But I've never asked him to blurb fiction, and never would. I guess he's Stephen King, but he's always been very, very kind to me. I think he's blurbed like 3 or 4 of my books now. I don't know if he read them, but he blurbed them.
I don't know if I read the blurbs, but I probably read the book. So
yeah,
the other thing is because it's like this as many kind of jokes or humorous things packed in as much as possible. It reminds me basically of how stand-up comedy works. Like you listen to someone like Jim Gaffigan, almost every line, like he's almost like the most jokes per minute in his comedy. Like it's so well written, his stand-up comedy. And I wonder if any of your stuff kind of is inspired from stand-up.
No, I mean, I there are times when I give talks, mostly if I'm on a book tour and I'm talking about my book, where I try to be funny, and I guess in some ways then I'm trying to use whatever lessons I've learned from watching stand-ups, but not when I'm writing so much, except for the same principle you're talking about, which is like I want to have yucks per minute to be a pretty high level for me.
Is there any stand-ups that you particularly enjoy?
Yeah, and I feel almost stupid saying this because everybody's saying it now, but I was saying it long ago. Nate Bargatze. I don't know if
he's great.
He's brilliant. The man is brilliant. And what he does is, it looks so easy, and nobody else does anything like it, which is why he's, I think, so popular.
Well, and I think now that you see Nate Bargatze, his style is very similar to how you described your approach, which is that you're kind of like acting like the idiot in the room.
Yes, and he does it so well, and you're like, the guy's really smart. You can't do what he does and not be really smart.
Yeah,
but he still sells it. That he's just a dope, can't even read. It never gets old, that particular approach, because he's so good at it, and there's enough truth in it. Like when he's saying, like, I don't read, he doesn't really like to read, particularly, probably. There's like all these words. No, now you turn the page and there's more words. He's probably real.
He has this one, so he's clueless around the house, but his wife knows everything. Yeah. And so like the electricity guy comes over and is asking all these questions, and Nate has like no idea what's going on or where the breakers are or whatever. And so finally the electricity guy says, well, can you introduce me to the man of the house?
Yeah.
And he has that style, that just sort of like very kind of like very dry, innocent style of speaking.
Oh, his delivery is a work of art.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And this has been pointed out by many, many people, but no obscenity at all. You could take a 5-year-old to his show and it would be fine. He's so good at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I also appreciate that too. I mentioned Jim Gaffigan. He has not quite a similar approach, but just it's very clean.
But it's clean. It's clean, and it's and because we've all seen comics, especially if you go live to see live comedy in a comedy club, you're going to see the opposite approach. We do the people who got to drop the F-bomb just to because it gets a laugh, because it makes people a little nervous, or it's like they laugh. Which is kind of a cheap, easy laugh. There are comics, who do that. They're good at it. Again, they'll jerk the laughs out of you. But then later on, you're like, that wasn't really that funny if I were to just say it. So anyway.
That's true. I owned a comedy club in New York City for a while. And
well, of course you did.
I've seen so much bad comedy, it's ridiculous, and I'm probably contributed to quite a bit of it myself. So, because once you own a comedy club, I can go on stage anytime I want. So I would go, and I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing for the customers.
Well, what did you do? What did you do? Because people will often ask me, like, you ever think about stand up? And I would say, no, I could not do that. I could not get up in front of strangers and not have them not laugh at me. That would kill me. Like, I just much rather just have the safety of, the page. So what did you do? Assuming you did not slay every single time, what did you do when you didn't kill, when nobody was laughing?
You kind of change the conversation a little bit. So you lean into crowd work, like, where you start talking to the audience and doing things, not making fun of people, but kind of taking what they say and making jokes out of that. Or you kind of have some prepackaged stuff ready to go. Like, listen, I was visiting, a dying child in a cancer hospital, and she really wanted me to stay, but I told her, no, there's 14 people in the comedy club who are waiting for me to tell jokes to them. So you just kind of try to, like, have stuff that
he's going to get a laugh. Yeah.
And just to kind of bring it back to life. But sometimes, there was one time out of all the times where I was really seriously booed, and that was painful. I didn't really have.
You actually got booed?
Yeah, booed. Like, I was in Hartford, Connecticut, and which I was told the next day is actually referred to as the crack capital of the country. And I made jokes about Hunter Biden smoking crack, and I didn't really know. Everybody in the room was probably like a crack dealer or something.
They're in the industry. You mock the local industry,
right? Because I was like, who even smokes crack anymore? Like, it's just this.
We do,
right? It's this cheap.
They're probably serving crack at the comedy club. It's probably like it's a 2-pipe minimum here.
That could be, and I don't really know for sure why. Like, no one explained to me later why I was booed, but that was an assumption that I made later.
I would go home and die if I got. I mean, that would be hard to recover from for me.
Sometimes it was hard. I think that's the hard thing about actually but writing is like you say, it's like performance as well. It's just a different kind of performance. It's a little bit more.
It's performance where you're safe from the audience, though. If you bomb, you're not aware of it, or you're aware of it gradually later. If you it's like you get a bad review for a book or something like that.
Yeah, which is painful too, because then
it is. I don't read for that reason. I don't read reviews. This is everybody will say the same thing. If you can read 10 reviews, 9 positive, 1 negative, and all you're going to do is think about the negative one. So I remember talking to Amy Tan about this one. I was saying I'm in a band with Amy Tan. And she said, I never read reviews unless they've already told me, my agent or somebody's already told me it's a rave, and then I'll read it. And that was good advice. Like, don't read them. Don't read them.
And you're able to actually, you're not curious about the bad ones?
No. I just don't want to know. I don't want to hear it. I know there are people who don't like me or just aren't going to be, you can't write something everybody likes. So why should I inflict that on myself? I'm just not going to do it.
That's true. Well, look, Dave, I really enjoyed Class Clown. I've been waiting for the memoir I feel like I've been waiting for this memoir for decades.
Well, I wrote it for you, James. Wrote it for you.
No, because I've asked you so many questions, and now you said, I don't want to have to answer all of James' questions. I'm just going to write all the answers right in this book. So it's the Memoirs.
Well, I owe you. You may not even remember this, but you're the only person ever gave me a Iraqi currency with Saddam Hussein's picture on it, and I still have that currency somewhere. And if it ever comes back, I mean, I'm holding it like an investment. If Iraq ever comes back and they get Saddam Hussein back out of the grave or whatever, I mean, I'm going to cash in. I'm going to cash that money in.
I mean, too bad I didn't give you Iranian currency with the Shah on it.
No, yeah, I was like, I'm a little blue about that. I've got Iraq.
I chose the wrong eye in the Middle East, so it's less likely for Hussein to make it back. But listen, Dave, always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Always a lot of fun, and I highly recommend all your books. But now I've enjoyed Class Clown, and thank you once again for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy doing your show. You're not like the other interviewers.
Yes, that's my goal, to get people to say that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.
This summer, Pluto TV is exploding with thousands of free movies. Summer of Cinema is here. Feel the explosive action all summer long with movies like Gladiator, Mission Impossible, Beverly Hills Cop, Good Burger, and Transformers: Dark of the Moon. Bring the action with you and stream for free from all your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.